Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the America's Founding series on the P.A.S. Report podcast. As your host, Nick Giordano, I am glad you could join me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. Share this episode with your family and friends. I got a great person that I'm going to focus on because I want you to imagine standing in the United States Senate chamber in 1826. 1826. Now, what does this have to do with our founding, the American Revolution? America's in full swing, growing as a nation, beginning to prosper. But when we look at the Senate chamber in this year, the hallowed hall, it's still relatively new. It echoes with the spirit of a young republic. And there was a lone man. He was aged, sharp-eyed, sat quietly, recalling a moment 50 years earlier when he affixed his name to a document that changed the world. He's the last living witness to one of the most important and profound lines in the Declaration of Independence. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. The man I'm talking about is Charles Carroll of Carrollton. He was one of the wealthiest men in colonial America. He was a devout Catholic in a Protestant-dominated society, and he risked everything. He risked everything to support a rebellion that might have cost him his immense fortune and his very liberty. You know, despite his profound contributions, his name isn't well known. It's not widely recognized today as the more famous contemporaries. But in this episode, we're going to explore the remarkable life of Charles Carroll, how this Catholic outsider became a powerful voice for liberty, challenged the entrenched religious discrimination that existed at the time, and he left an indelible and often overlooked legacy on our republic. Because Charles Carroll's story begins not in humble circumstances. This was a guy that was born into the lap of luxury. He was born in 1737, colonial Maryland, and he was heir to one of the largest fortunes in North America at the time. His family's wealth built on vast land holdings and extensive mercantile operations. And when it comes to mercantilism, trade back and forth between Europe. Now, from an early age, it was clear that he was destined to take a different path than simply managing estates and land. His Catholic parents, they faced limited educational opportunities here in the United States directly due to their faith. And they sent him across the Atlantic at just 11 years old. And he spent over a decade in Europe. He immersed himself in Jesuit schools in France, studying law in London. And there he was absorbing the new ideals, radical ideals. He was learning all about the Enlightenment, Lockean principles of natural rights, Montesquieu's separation of powers, the burgeoning call for individual liberty. And he observed firsthand the contradictions between Britain's vaunted claims of liberty and its increasingly repressive policies towards the colonies. Now, when Carroll returned home to Maryland in 1765, he was fluent in the Enlightenment ideals. He faced a personal contradiction. Despite all this wealth, despite his impeccable education, his sharp intellect, Charles Carroll was still a Catholic, and Catholics were looked down upon. You know, a lot of people at the time, you had these suspicions of Catholics, and it stemmed from the Protestant Reformation. There was also questions about where were the allegiances? Would a Catholic's loyalty be to the church and the Pope? Would that loyalty override the commitment to the birth of a new nation? So Catholics were often denied the most basic of rights. Charles couldn't vote. He couldn't hold public office. He couldn't practice law in public courts. Now imagine, you're a leading citizen. You have all this wealth. You're educated in the finest European schools. Yet in the colonies, you're denied fundamental rights that are afforded to others simply because you're a Catholic. See, it wasn't just blacks that faced discrimination. There was a lot of discrimination, and we have to be honest about it. But here's the thing. discrimination didn't stop him. It didn't silence him. It actually galvanized him. Unable to engage in public life directly, he chose a different weapon. He chose his pen. And as tensions escalated between Britain and the colonies, Carroll adopted the powerful pseudonym First Citizen. In a series of letters published in the Maryland Gazette, he fearlessly attacked British taxation and corruption within Maryland's colonial government, and he engaged in a fierce public debate with Daniel Delany. This was Maryland's powerful secretary and a prominent loyalist. Now, their exchanges were published widely, and it became an intellectual battleground, with Carroll being able to masterfully dismantle arguments for British authority. He laid the compelling case for American rights, American liberty, American freedom. His wit, his logic, his sheer courage in standing against the establishment at that time, despite being disenfranchised, well, other people began to take notice. He started to turn heads across the colonies, even among Protestants who had long viewed Catholics with distrust. See, his brilliance and dedication to the cause, it didn't go unnoticed. And in 1776, the Continental Congress, that was desperate for allies at the time, they sent Carroll on a high-stakes diplomatic mission to Canada. He traveled north with a very distinguished delegation, including Benjamin Franklin and Samuel Chase. And the whole purpose of this endeavor was to try and persuade Quebec to join the fight against Britain. Now, the mission ultimately failed. It was unsuccessful. And the reason it was unsuccessful was because of a strong British presence and a lack of French-Canadian interest in American republicanism at the time. You know, the very fact, though, that Congress entrusted a Catholic with such a critical and confidential endeavor speaks volumes about their recognition of Charles's ability and his unwavering commitment to the revolutionary cause. And then came July of 1776. The Declaration of Independence is going to be approved. And Charles Carroll, a Catholic who couldn't vote or hold office in his own colony, was called upon to sign it. He became the only Catholic, and one of the wealthiest men to affix his name to this new revolutionary document that is going to transform the world. And as legend has it, there was another Charles Carroll in Maryland at the time. So Charles Carroll, the one I'm speaking of, to ensure the British knew exactly which Charles Carroll was committing this act of treason, he boldly added of Carrollton to his signature. And it was a deliberate defiant act, a pledge to our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor from a man who had more fortune to lose than almost any of the other signatories, a man who had already been denied fundamental rights for his faith. His signature was not just a political statement, it was a personal testament to his profound belief in the principles of liberty and self-government. When we look at it, you constantly hear me bring up the word statesman, and that's what I mean. An ordinary man rising up to become a statesman. Carroll's story didn't end with a signature. He lived long enough to watch the revolution's promises tested and betrayed at times. The path to establishing a truly free nation was fraught with challenges. And for Charles Carroll, it meant grappling with America's growing pains, pushing for the ideals that he believed in, even when they conflicted with the prevailing norms of the time. But it also meant grappling with his own contradictions that I'll get into in a moment. Having personally experienced the sting of religious discrimination, Charles became a tireless advocate for greater religious freedom in the birth of this new nation. And as a key figure in Maryland's Constitutional Convention, he championed the cause he knew so intimately. He was instrumental in ensuring that the new state constitution abolished religious tests for holding office. And he made sure that this new constitution would enshrine protections for all faiths. His actions and his unwavering voice laid crucial groundwork for the very principles that would later become enshrined in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, ensuring that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. He pushed Maryland, and by extension, he pushed the 13 colonies, the entire United States, towards a better vision of liberty than many could have imagined. Yet, like many wealthy founders, Charles Carroll's history is complex. His legacy is complex, and at times it's contradictory, as I alluded to before. Despite his fervent belief in liberty, despite his own fight against oppression, well, Carroll inherited and owned hundreds of enslaved people across his vast estates. Now, there's no record that he ever abused it. In fact, quite the contrary. He did take better care of his slaves than most did. But he still held slaves, and this was a stark and painful contradiction to the very ideals of freedom he championed, but also to the ideals of Roman Catholicism. And later in life, he did express support for gradual emancipation of all peoples, Black peoples, and anyone that was enslaved, anyone that was in some type of servitude. So this reflects an internal conflict between him personally, the prevailing social norms of the era and the universal principles of liberty that he so deeply espoused. And his story highlights the profound and unresolved moral challenge of slavery that haunted the nation's founding at the time. It reveals the complex and often troubling realities of the era, the difficulties and the ongoing struggle to live up to America's highest ideals. If we truly want to understand America, we got to look at the totality of America, the good and the bad. And Charles Carroll exemplifies this. Now, after the war, Carroll continued to serve in his new nation. He served in the first United States Senate, the first Congress, and helped shape a nascent federal government. And he eventually retired from active public office, but he didn't retire from public life. He remained a respected figure. He remained the living link to the heroic days of the Revolution, a symbol of the young republic's endurance and the enduring spirit of our founding. And Charles Carroll's life spanned nearly a century, from the colonial era to the beginnings of America's industrial age. And in 1828, at the remarkable age of 89, he laid the cornerstone for the Baltimore-Ohio Railroad. Think about that. This is America's first major railway. It was a tangible link between the revolutionary past that he helped forge and America's future, a powerful symbol of progress and expansion. 4 years later, 1832, at the age of 95, Charles Carroll of Carrollton would pass away in Baltimore. He was the very last living signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he carried with him the direct memory of the audacious pledge for freedom. See, Charles Carroll began his journey as an outsider, a Catholic disenfranchised in his own land. And through intellect, courage, a sharp tongue, and an unwavering conviction, he became a central figure in the founding of a nation and in American history. He risked his immense fortune for a country that didn't fully accept him. But in doing so, he helped lay the foundation for a much freer nation, one that would, in time, strive to truly live up to the promise of liberty for all, regardless of their faith, color, or agenda. His story reminds us that the fight for freedom is complex. It's waged by unexpected heroes, and that the ideals of America were forged by a diverse group of people, all willing to put our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor on the line. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a good review, particularly on Apple Podcasts, and share this episode with your family and friends. Post it on social media. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back next week with more great episodes of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.